grab a cold drink because this is going to be a very unique adventure. I've finally connected with a placement agency, as I connected with several placement agencies, and they asked me, "Are you aware that there was a warrant out for your arrest?" Which I said, "Clearly no."
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Defense Never Rests. I am Megan Henry, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Oliver. How are you tonight, Oliver?
Doing pretty well. How about you?
Good. So this week we have on Daryl Sanchez, who he is the Director of Claims for a TPA that handles long-term care facility claims. So I'm interested to talk to him, not just because of what he does, but as you know, our listeners will find out, he went through a very interesting experience with his identity being stolen that really affected his ability to find work and just make a living. And I thought it was super interesting, and I think you would agree. So without further ado, let's bring him in. Good evening, Daryl. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on The Defense Never Rests. So happy to have you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here, and I appreciate the service that you provide to individuals who like to tell their story. So I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity.
I think I've said this to you before, and I've said it's like the most fun part of my job, I think, is doing this, because it's just great to talk to people and hear, everyone's journeys and how they got where they are today. And I'm so happy that now I get to do it often.
Yes, well, thank you for the opportunity.
So
yeah, they don't let me do it very much, so.
for good reason. That's why I like to have Oliver on, though. He adds good quips during the podcast, so he's always a good co-host.
Nice.
I'm like Andy Richter.
So, Daryl, just to get us a little started, can you tell us a little bit about what you do? I know you're the Director of Claims for a TPA handling long-term care nursing claims, but for those just tuning in, what is it exactly that you do on a global and day-by-day basis?
Well, to be sure, a claims director does just that, directs claims and the day-to-day operations of the claims department. I found myself over the past year sort of filling two spaces, being not only the claims director, but also working as the claims manager, because just a month after I arrived, our claims manager, we had two of them that worked beneath me. Well, not beneath me, but certainly worked in relation to me. One of them left. So I had to take on the responsibilities, but I found it actually to be very rewarding and informative, because I was able to learn a lot more about the ins and outs of long-term care, which admittedly I was frankly rather alien to before I did it. So doing that plus doing the claims directing part was really an education. And so, but to your question about what a claims director does is just managing the day-to-day operations and making sure that individuals are performing, making sure that goals are being met, making sure that whatever problems that need to be elevated from the adjuster to a supervisor to a claims manager and cannot be resolved will come to me before it goes to my boss, who's the vice president of claims.
How has the role been different? Like, as you said, if being a claims manager is very different. So had you ever had the role of claims manager before?
I had not had the role of claims manager before. Admittedly, this was my first opportunity to work in management in a claims department. I certainly had done sort of senior level work working in claims in times past. But the claims manager role, as it differs from claims director, is where a claims manager is truly involved in the day-to-day activities of managing adjusters and managing the workflow, whereas the claims director sees not only that claims manager, but the work of other claims managers as well, and try to correlates them and make sure that they're all functioning properly and, dealing with shall we say, the higher level things such as coverage issues, such as client issues, such as, elevated complaints, things like that, Department of Insurance litigated matters, and that sort of thing.
Now, do you find is it hard to kind of sidestep both those roles? In a way, you're almost managing yourself.
Well, that's one of the benefits is I am managing myself, but I know not to take unnecessary days off. No, I find that especially being given the opportunity of having not worked in long-term care before, being exposed at both levels, at the day-to-day operations and the larger policy driven position, that really has provided a nice balance of being able to understand exactly how the process works, particularly as regards to long-term claims. And so I actually found it to be, not I want to say easy. Easy is not the word I want to use, but I found it quite manageable.
Yeah, no, don't ever say easy.
So-
Then
so
someone's
I-
gonna hear it.
No, easy is not a
When we're
word I would
talking
use.
about
Go
when
ahead.
you're talking about long-term care, just so we're clear, we're talking about like nursing homes and assisted living facilities, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Thank you. Because I wouldn't want people to confuse it with long-term disability. That seems to be something of a confusion with some who are not familiar with it, particularly in claimants who file claims. What we deal with is long-term care insurance, whether it be in a skilled nursing facility, assisted living, or home care. And what makes it interesting for us right now, not only as a result of what's happening with COVID, and I know we'll be talking about that shortly, but just the whole industry itself, the industry of skilled nursing and assisted living. These are fairly recent creations. They didn't exist 20, 30 years ago when this product first developed. This product developed sometime in like the mid 1980s. And as a result of that, there have been changes of how senior care, or shall we say elderly care, has come about. It really has grown. But our policies are such that they were written in a time where there was primarily only nursing homes. And so we find ourselves dealing with a lot of individuals who want coverage for one particular thing, but the policy is very specific as to what it covers. And that's where, shall we say, some diplomatic finesse has to come in terms of my abilities, such as they may be.
Now, I've handled, I guess, more nursing home claims, but what are the type of bulk of claims that you see come through the long-term care facilities?
Well, we work as a third-party administrator. We deal with several companies, and some companies have primarily home care claims, and some have facility claims, and that could be either be assisted living, nursing home, and depending on jurisdiction, because we actually operate nationwide, different states and different jurisdictions will have different names for assisted living, such as residential care facility, adult congregate living facility, home plus in certain states. And so being able to traverse the language from a statutory perspective is certainly one challenge to what we do.
Well, yeah, because it changes so much state by state, and there's a lot of regulations, and you have to really have someone who's really knowledgeable about like the specifics for each state. It's not a one size fits all approach by any means.
That's the truth. But what we guide ourselves by is the terms of the policy, because as the administrators, we're certainly essentially adjudicating based on someone else's paper. Somebody else has written the policy, and we are just administering to the terms of that. Sometimes it doesn't always work the way the client would like to think they would, because long-term care specifically is a relatively new industry, as I mentioned, certainly a lot younger than workers' comp or even auto. And so those areas, you can imagine that case law is pretty well established in terms of policy interpretation and so forth. But in long-term care, it still continues to evolve because it's a relatively new product. And because of that, yes, there are challenges when you look from jurisdiction to jurisdiction in terms of what the regulations may say versus what the policy says.
And so, and you had mentioned that you hadn't worked in long-term care before your current company. So, what were you working in before you made it over to this company?
I hesitate only because I wouldn't want my job that I had prior to this be an indication of my abilities to do my job. But that actually will relate to the ID theft that you and I had talked about. But the job I had before this, ironically, I was working as operations distribution manager for a publication company.
Okay,
I worked for a newspaper for a brief period of time. I know it stuns everyone.
Well,
So wait. I don't want to gloss over what I just heard here, because I heard something about ID theft here. This sounds fascinating to me.
Oh, goodness.
So All right, you got to at least give me some tidbit.
Yeah, let's talk about the ID theft. We can get back into claims in a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Like, this sounds much more interesting.
It is all connected, and I will tell you this. One thing I want to make clear is that I labored over how I want to present this, simply because one can get bogged down in the nuances because there was so much to it. This was not a traditional ID theft that you may hear about, where somebody got my credit card or something like that. The circumstances are quite unique, and if you'd like to hear the story, I'll do my best to offer you the highlights of it.
I think us and everyone listening wants to hear the story.
Yeah.
Well, then sit back, grab a cold drink, because this is going to be a very unique adventure. And it relates to claims, and I'll tell you how. Prior to living in Colorado, my family, my wife and daughter and I, we lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, after having moved from California. Pittsburgh, go Pirates. So we were in California, and at that time I was working for an auto liability carrier, and I was doing all right. I'd been there for a number of years, but I felt like I had sort of peaked in terms of what I can do at that place. And at the meantime, I was also teaching, because that really was, I felt my passion still remains in being of an educator, I would call myself. But I worked at an insurance company, and the dates are important here because it's strange how these things kind of move all together. In the year 2017, gosh, that sounds so long ago, but in the year 2017, my wife and I had decided that because of some, just the cost of living in California, particularly in Los Angeles where we lived, the whole quality of life issue really compelled us to reevaluate what we wanted to do, because we had a daughter who was in school. I had very little confidence in the local school district, that we had decided that we were going to just, heed the call of adventure and move across country. And so between the beginning of 2017 towards, around September, we were making efforts to move. We were going to pack up everything. And I need to point out that I had never left California. That is to say, I never lived anywhere else. I was born and raised in California. All my family, my social network was there in California. And I had this job, for 10 plus years. But we decided if we were going to do this, this was going to be the only time to do it. And so we seized the opportunity. We packed our goods, we loaded up the truck, and we headed out of Beverly, to speak. Well, as I'm making this transition, unbeknownst to me, and this is where the excitement begins, unbeknownst to me, somebody, I don't know who, we'll call him a perpetrator, was creating some sort of problem at a government facility in Los Angeles. And when the individuals, people called the police on him, he gave my name, Daryl Sanchez. The police officer asked for his ID. He had no ID. Police officer asked for a social security number. He gave a social security number that was not mine, but somebody else's, a date of birth that was also not mine, yet a third person. And so the police officer proceeded to look in the California law enforcement database for the name Daryl Sanchez. Well, I come to find that there are apparently 9 Daryl Sanchez's in California, and mine was the top one. So without much more than just the name, he associated my information with this perpetrator. And it really was as simple as that. And I must question the competency of this police officer. And I mean, I can't put it any simpler, because, as the story progresses, this happened in March of 2017. I was completely unaware of it. So while he identifies this individual as Daryl Sanchez, he finds, well, Daryl Sanchez has no wants and no warrants. Well, of course I don't, because I don't have any wants or warrants. So he does a pat down the gentleman, finds that he has a controlled substance. So he writes the gentleman a ticket. But because Daryl Sanchez has no warrants, he cuts the guy loose. So the guy, identified as Daryl Sanchez, walks off with a ticket to appear in court sometime in August. For all we know, this guy could be an axe murderer. He could be on FBI's 10 most wanted list. But ultimately, the police officer let him go, thinking he was me. So now, as I'm proceeding forward, again, this was in March 2017. I have no idea this has happened. I've made my decision to leave California and move to Pittsburgh, because I believe that we're going to find opportunities. I mean, I have my law degree. I have insurance experience. I've been an instructor at a college in Los Angeles. I felt it would be fairly easy. Well, I got there, I think it's September 4th, 2017. Could not find work to save my life. Applied a number of places, could not find it. Always told they went in some other direction, or whatever the case may be. And my wife and I were struggling, because we thought this was going to be a fairly, if not smooth transition, a manageable one. But the fact that I could not find work and I was away from my entire social network, and a week after being there, my wife got into a car accident and totaled our vehicle. Fortunately, she was fine, but our only source of transportation had now been gone. And we lived in a part of Pittsburgh. And when I say Pittsburgh, that's the reference point. But we actually lived 19 miles south of Pittsburgh in a small town called Elizabeth. I mean, and it was a small town, you know. The joke is that they had to widen the main road just to put a white line down the center. That's how small the town was, like maybe 1,000 people. So far removed from anything that looks like civilization, especially since we came from Los Angeles. So I'm going through September, October, November, not finding work and not understanding why, and trying to figure this out and thinking maybe this was a whole huge mistake, that we're out in the middle of a place that's very alien to us. And the one thing I will say about Pennsylvania, it is very different from California and Los Angeles. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's almost like a foreign country. You know, the only saving grace was that they spoke English and took American currency. But other than that, it really was like a different place altogether.
And
So,
the Steelers.
and the Steelers, of course. Well, you've got to have, it's in the DNA out there, without a doubt. Everyone was a Steelers fan, or Kansas City. I found some people like Kansas City out there. Surprising. So it wasn't till around March of 2018, again, being without a work, living, you know, far off in this, you know, another region of the United States, that I finally connected with a placement agency, as I connected with several placement agencies, and they asked me, "Are you aware that there was a warrant out for your arrest?" Which I said, "Clearly no." And they basically
you didn't say, "Yes, I'm on the run."
Yes, perhaps that would have been a better story if I had told them, but it was because, you know, you fill out the application and you do a background check, and I'd submitted to several background checks out there to a number of places, including insurance industries, academic institutions, law firms, and I suspect what had happened was that they had run my background, they found a red flag, and they decided not to hire me. Now, whether or not they had to disclose that to me or not, I don't know. But one thing is certain is that at least 2 employers declined to give me a job opportunity because of this warrant that was out for my arrest. And as I find out about it, I quickly call some friends of mine back in LA who work for the DA's office, and come to find that, yeah, this warrant had my name, my last address, my birth date, my social security number. And I'm sitting there going, how is that possible? There is a doppelganger out there. I almost felt like Lee Harvey Oswald. Like there's another person out there trying to set the stage for, you know, my ultimate demise. So what I'd found out, and talking to a friend of mine that I went to law school with who did criminal law, that there was in fact a warrant out for my arrest with my name on it for possession of controlled substance. What had happened was, apparently I was to go to court based on a ticket that was written in March of 2017. In August, I was supposed to attend a court. Well, guess what? Daryl Sanchez didn't appear at that hearing or at that arraignment. So a warrant was immediately issued for my arrest, and it was uploaded in the court system on September 1st. I arrived in Pennsylvania September 4th. So you can see how someone may be a little suspicious, saying, "Oh, this gentleman is on the run from the law in California, you know, trying to hide in Pennsylvania." And if you want to hide, Pennsylvania is perhaps a good place to hide. So there I was, not having, being depleted of resources, not having any idea how I'm going to do this. And so fortunately, I had some good friends that assisted me in basically saying, okay, well, you've got to come back to California. I have to make an appearance because I actually have to, enter a plea. And so set a hearing date for April of 2018. And I flew out there on my own expense. And I had a heart-to-heart with my friend who acted as my attorney. And he basically said, I have no idea what the judge is going to do. The judge may not believe you. The judge may remand you. The judge may put you in jail. I don't know what's going to happen. We'll just have to see what comes about. But fortunately, we were able to get the police report from the agency that ticketed this individual. The police officer, and I'm going to be frank, did a very poor job. This bordered on incompetency with regards to what the officer did. He didn't take a picture of the individual. He didn't offer any identifying information of the individual. And so we have no idea what this individual looked like or who he was. All we know is that the police officer got my name from the California Law Enforcement Data Bank and associated with him. Now, at the time of this gentleman being ticketed, fortunately, I was actually in court. And so my appearance was on record at 2 courts at that very moment where apparently I was being arrested. That's what saved me. So I was able to
Yeah.
present that to the DA, and beforehand, ultimately the DA dismissed all the actions. On top of the fact that the witnesses that apparently saw me at this facility where this incident took place, they didn't appear in court. So the matter was dismissed. And the judge essentially gave me a get out of jail free card, which basically said, do not arrest this individual on this warrant. So that at least resolved the ID issue. But it did not resolve my economic issue, or it did not resolve my job issue. But as a result of getting that resolved and my proof of that, I was then able to find gainful employment in Pittsburgh, and kind of worked my way back, to working in claims. And because it was still a situation that we still deal with in certain respects financially, that a friend of mine who lived in Colorado said, I've got a friend who's a publisher of the local newspaper out here and is looking for somebody with a legal mind that has a legal background to help solve some problems with regards to their distribution. I interviewed, they liked me. They said, would you come out to Colorado and work as the director of distribution for our publication? I said, absolutely, get me out of here. And so we packed up again, and my wife and daughter and I moved from there to Colorado, where I was. And it was a great learning experience working in publication, because I got to use a lot of my insurance skills, the ability to negotiate, because I dealt with a lot of independent contractors, ability to analyze, look at data, offer assessments with regards to that. And so it really was, to me, it was almost like being paid for graduate work, because I was obviously drawing a salary and learning a whole new industry, which is very, very interesting to me. But clearly it was not the industry I should be in. I longed to be back in claims. As I mentioned, I feel like I'm an educator at heart, and I think that being in claims is an opportunity to educate people on policies, on understanding policies. So an opportunity presented itself where they were looking for a claims director. I spoke with the recruiter. Long and short of it, to make a long story short, and I think that's probably too late at this juncture, but the fact of the matter is they liked me, interviewed, and so began my my time at the long-term care company.
Well,
Wow, that's way worse than when somebody stole my identity and ordered HBO and Home Team Sports on Comcast.
yeah. I mean, when
I
you
thought that was terrible.
when you found out or figured out what had happened, I mean, I know what I'd be like. What were you thinking? Like, were you like, is this a joke? It really, I mean, it had such an impact on your whole life. Like, I'm almost speechless about it, because I just can't imagine
that I'm still standing. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. I will say this. It was extraordinarily difficult. I mean, I can't put it in any of the simpler words. It was extraordinarily difficult to, again, having left everything I knew in California, trying to start a new life. And this one particular thing just, shattered everything. And to your question of how I felt, I absolutely didn't know how to feel, because I couldn't imagine, well, clearly it wasn't me, but as far as the court is concerned, because I'm familiar with courts, as far as they're concerned, it is you. And I've got to find a way to sort of, clear my good name. What is it that Shakespeare says? He who steals from my wallet steals trash, but he steals my good name, steals from me. And I really was sort of at a loss to figure what to do. But one thing I knew I had to do is I had to resolve it, whatever that meant. And so again, through the good graces of individuals that helped me along, I was able to get it resolved. But at that moment, you can't help but think that there's some sort of cosmic order conspiring against you just to make it difficult. But
can you imagine had you stayed in California and been arrested, having to fight that from behind bars?
That is what I think about sometimes. It's almost amusing, because I was still traveling to California on occasion when I could to see my family, because my entire family, my brothers and sisters and my mother still live back in California. And that occurred to me that if I had just been pulled over for a moving violation, they would have looked me up. They would have seen there was a warrant, and they would have arrested me. And I would have been, what are you guys doing? What are you talking about? And to have to fight that from the inside, Lord knows what could have happened. But I mean, those are some of the things that could...
The real perpetrator really is named Daryl Sanchez. It's just not you.
Well, and
That
you
would
know, who
be
knows what
the
this guy's name
ultimate.
is? I don't know if it would be the ultimate, but what I have found, and I'm happy to talk about this if you wish, is that what it did for me and to me as an individual, because I recognize that you can't control certain things. There may be things happen, and I also should point out that, you know, horrible things have happened to people. People have lost loved ones, people have lost limbs, people have really gone through real tragedy, and I cannot compare what happened to me with that level of tragedy. But it definitely is something that happened to me, as something I had to develop a perspective upon, because I couldn't walk around with the animosity and loathing that I had for a period of time for not so much the perpetrator, but the police officer and his absolute incompetence. And I had to work through that. And I really had a lot of anger about that. There's no doubt about it. But I recognize ultimately that these things are going to happen, and not to be so, you know, casual about it, but it's something you have to work through. You know, things are going to be handed to you. You've got to find a way to work through them. And that's what I revealed about myself, because I learned, you know, shall we say, in that trip to Pennsylvania and the ID, I learned less about the world, but I learned more about myself. And I think that was something worth taking out of it.
Yeah.
I'm getting an idea here for an app on a phone, like alibi, where you can be tracked using your phone, and you could be like, no, man, wasn't me, right here. See?
I patent that. I have official rights to that. You know, well,
But
again,
I just think of how fortunate though you were that you had court appearances that day.
yes.
I mean, think about it, there's some days that you might have to, well, these days you might have court appearances, but you're at home. But at the time, there might have a day that you have court appearances, and then you might go a week without being in court. So it's very fortunate that you were able to track your location in a very concrete sense at that
Oh,
time,
yes.
because I mean that's almost like the shining light was looking down on you. I would have cried tears of relief, I think.
I got to tell you, I was weeping a little at the conclusion of it, when, you know, I was released, when the judge basically said, clearly it's not you, and the matter was dismissed. Yeah, I mean, just the mental exhaustion of having carried that for as long as I did, you know, not only for myself, but for my family, and knowing what it did to us economically. I mean, it really, you know, took us into a very difficult place. And, you know, I just, I think about it now, and I think about it more, you know, not so much with a casual view, but just recognizing what I did through that process and how I got through that process, and thinking that I would never be able to work anywhere again. You know, you think all kinds of horribles when something like that happens, because you don't know how you'll get out of it. You know, when something like that happens, which is beyond your control, you feel absolutely out of control. And so being able to reorient yourself and going through this process, which didn't happen like, you know, the very next day, I have to say, it was a long drawn out process to just understand how I could be more responsible for myself about these things, because, you know, dragons are going to pop up, and you've got to be able to meet the challenges, you know, depending on how you've oriented yourself. So that's certainly what I've learned from the process. So perhaps this officer did me a favor by allowing me to sort of shed my ego and reveal my humility to myself, and move forward.
Well, I mean, that's certainly I think a very thoughtful approach to it. that shows many years of working through it. But did the judge show any, like, was the judge even apologetic? Like, I'm sorry that you had to go through this, are bad.
Yes.
Like,
I will say that I received a great deal of sympathy from the deputy DA as well as the judge, understanding the circumstances, because it was clearly evident, not only in terms of the, you know, highly questionable information that the police officer indicated in his police report, but my own evidence in terms of actual, you know, judicial records showing that clearly I was somewhere else, doing something else at the time. And yeah, they were very sympathetic for the situation. But ironically, when I explained to the judge, when she, you know, granted the dismissal and gave me my, if you will, get out of jail free card, I said, now, does this, you know, will this forever take care of it? And he just kind of shrugged his shoulders. He says, I don't know. You know, the internet is what it is. And though no guarantees that it wouldn't pop up somewhere, somehow, some way. But for the purposes of the, you know, the court record, you know, I was cleared.
yeah.
But and from that
What
moving
happened
forward,
with the police officer?
Oh,
Where's
yeah.
he?
you know what? that is of no consequence to me.
He quit.
It's a fair question,
Not
but
good at his job.
who knows what became of him? And I'd found I
His
had
last
to
name
release
wasn't Furman, was it?
Furman or Berman. No,
Wasn't that
yeah,
a from OJ?
Oh yes,
Or did
yes.
I miss that?
True story. Christopher Darden was my professor when I was in law school. He was my criminal procedure professor. And I found him to be a very, very human individual. He shared with me just stories of things when we were able to talk as professor and student. So I actually found him to be quite a pleasant individual. But it was not Furman. And to be sure, the disposition of that police officer now is of no consequence to me. And I only say that after years of working through the frustration that I was left with as a result of decisions that other people have made. So I don't say that lightly.
From the outside, it sounds like what you said, incompetence or mistake. It doesn't sound like like he had some conspiratorial mindset to screw you over. It just sounds like he was extremely sloppy. And
frankly, yes. I think it would give him too much to suggest that he had the capacity to think conspiratorially. That'll be my aside for the police officer. I just think it was laziness. I think it was just the desire to move this along. But fact is fact. The end result was me having to reorient my whole life as a result of it, which was, quite therapeutic, to be honest with you.
I'd probably get the order tattooed on a part of my body that way.
Well, yeah, to be sure. What I did is I took pictures of it, sent it to my, my friend who's an attorney out here in Colorado, sent it to my wife, put another in a safe deposit box, keep a photocopy with me because you just never know. And since that time, it has not been a problem. And, the humorous part about it is that moving forward, every job I went to, I had to disclose to them, well, be aware that if you do a background on me, you're going to find that there's a warrant, but it's not me. And,
that's one way.
What's that?
So that's one way to make them remember you.
Oh, to be sure.
The warrant guy.
Exactly. And so I'm happy to say it has not affected my ability to find gainful employment moving forward. But it's almost like, I don't know if you folks are familiar with Alan Watts. He was a Zen philosopher of the 1950s and 60s. He just tells the story of a Chinese farmer. And the summation of that story is that, the whole order of nature is an integrated system of immense complexities such that you cannot tell what is going to be the result of misfortune or the result of good fortune. And, live by that and move forward because things are going to happen, as the bumper sticker says.
Yeah. Right. So, backing up a little bit though, when you were a practicing attorney for quite some time. So what type of law did you practice?
Well, admittedly, I wasn't a practicing attorney. I worked for an insurance company within their legal department, and I actually represented. So I never practiced as an attorney. I had the ability to teach, and I worked as a representative. I essentially represented the insurance company I worked for, whenever they were sued in court. But to that extent, I would certainly settle matters and present matters for hearings. So we just did not administrative hearings, but we did hearings. So they're just a bench officer and evidentiary matters and things of that nature. But it was insurance, primarily. Insurance defense is what I did for 10 years when I worked for the insurance company in California.
And it was after that point that's when you and your wife decided, like, let's make the big change and move out cross country to beautiful land of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Yes. I mean, there were some things that came about. For example, my father-in-law that I was very close to, sadly, he died suddenly on New Year's Eve, 2016. Yeah, 2016, because the next day was 2017. And that certainly caused us to really think about our own mortality and what we wanted to do. And I had been, like I said, at the company for a number of years. I felt like I had done everything I could at that company, wanting to do different things, but I did not want to do the same thing at a different company. I really wanted to, do something different. And we had talked about it. Even when I was in law school, we had contemplated moving to a different part of the country, like back east. And I always wanted to experience that. And this seemed like the opportunity, because I can tell you this, there would have been a number of reasons I could have talked myself out of it, saying, no, it's too much to do. Where you're at is where you're at. But something told me, you got to make this move. You got to make this transition, because if you don't, no matter what happens, you're going to sit there and go, we could have done it, but we did it. and we're battered and bruised as a result of it. But that was part of the transition, I suppose.
Speaking as someone who lived in Pittsburgh but is not from Pittsburgh, I could tell you, if you don't have a network there, it's kind of a tricky place to just land and figure out stuff to do and where to go. I was lucky. I moved there to go to law school, and so a third of the law school class or so were native Pittsburghers, and or from the surrounding areas, and people are like, oh, you got to go here, we got to go do that, and so you got a social network built in that way. But I can't imagine just being like, I'm going to go and try and find a job. When I moved and was just trying to look for an apartment, I will tell you, it was a bizarre, very bizarre experience. I had a limited budget, and by that I mean no budget, and I had some very questionable choices that I could have opted for. Luckily, I landed in a pretty okay spot, but I admire your tenacity to pack up and just move. And you weren't even in the city; you were in Elizabeth.
Yeah, we were in a I don't know if it's a suburb of Pittsburgh, but it was about maybe 20 minutes from the West Virginia border, southwest of Pittsburgh, a real rural area, economically depressed. And Pittsburgh, to your point, I agree with you. Pittsburgh is has a metropolitan look, but a small town feel. Everyone seems to know one another, and you have to have a network. But I've decided, you have to be the fool before you can be the master. And so, you have to take these opportunities. And I felt like, that seemed to be the ideal time to take the opportunities, whatever my conscience was telling me about. No, this is not a good idea. But I'm glad I did it.
You didn't have anybody to help you order a Primanti's Brothers sandwich, appropriately. You just had to be like, give me usual.
Yes. Everything with French fries. What's the idea? Just French fries on all the sandwiches.
I don't know. I don't get that, but whatever.
Well, it sounds like a giant stomach ache waiting to happen.
Yes. Well, all I would say about my experience with Pittsburgh is that I'm glad I did it, but I would not do it again.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a point well taken. I think you had Pittsburgh set up for you in the most unideal scenario imaginable, and it already probably being a difficult, venue to go into, and then you had all these extra circumstances going on. I don't blame you. I also thought about going to law school in Pittsburgh, and I remember I eventually decided that I wasn't going to do that because I didn't want to move there to be where I knew not a soul, and I'd be completely on my own. I was like, I don't know. I like the school, but I don't
it's
know.
Not LA. I mean, come on. it's Pittsburgh. It's not LA.
Ed, so when you transitioned over to work for this publishing company, I mean, that had to also be such a shock. Like, one, you're probably thrilled to have a very concrete employment position after everything that you'd been through for the prior few years, but such a change from what you had been doing for so long. So how was the adaptation to, that new role for you?
I tell you what, who helped me with it was the publisher, who was my boss, and he was extraordinarily kind, and recognizing that I had no experience in publishing, but that's why he brought me in. And he referred to the gentleman who wrote the book on Nike, the shoe company, how whenever a problem developed within the company, they would bring in attorneys or accountants to solve the problem, because these were analytical individuals. So with that, he had the idea, this publisher, to hire somebody who had a law background to solve problems within the industry. And he said, you're new here, so you can ask all kinds of questions. No one will think you're foolish if you're asking fundamental questions, because you know nothing about it. And everyone knows that you know nothing about it, but that's why you're here, to know about it. And that was a great encouragement to me, to be able to go in there and recognize that I'm not expected to know everything, but it certainly was my duty to figure out, where the problems lie, to go ahead and implement some sort of efficiency system that would help, move the publication distribution system along. So that was a great learning experience for me as well.
Well, and I just think it's just an interesting place to work, and also like an interesting thing to have on your resume, because it's so different from, what at least like Oliver and I do on a day-by-day basis. Like, I mean, you're working more with like the creative mind, so to speak, versus like us more analytical, run the course type situation. So I don't know. I can see there's be a lot of challenges there as well.
Definitely a lot of challenges, just learning, a whole different business model, if you will,
Yeah.
understanding how it works, how things relate to one another. I mean, certainly put me in a room with an insurance policy and a lawsuit, and I can figure out things. But stick me in a room of 40,000 pieces of publications that need to be sent out within a certain amount of time. That requires logistics. I mean, that really required a different way of thinking about things and problem solving. One thing I will say that I found interesting is that we distributed a number of newspapers in the northern Colorado area. So I got to see headlines of not only national publications, but regional publications. And it always struck me as interesting how the same news story could be, if you will, spun in different ways. And that's all I'll say about that. But that was interesting.
Well, I think that's interesting as well, because it would be such a stark contrast. Be like, this one's going here and this one's going here, and it's it's the same story.
Yes. And being able to actually look at the papers, that's very interesting.
So where you're at now, what are the sort of the typical types of, not that any claim is typical, in the 30,000 foot view, but what sort of claims are you mostly facing, and how has that changed since you first joined to now, if at all?
Well, because elderly care continues to grow, because obviously the population continues to get older. We have our set of facility claims, as well as our share of home care claims. But I think you're making reference to COVID and maybe the impact that has had, if I understood you correctly.
It's probably the biggest sort of sea change that almost everyone has faced.
No doubt.
That's
no doubt. Well, I would think that, quite frankly, certainly we saw a decrease in claims. I will tell you that across the board. I think all insurance industries saw a relative decrease in claims, particularly auto, which essentially dried up. I know in California that's what happened, because people stopped driving, and so there are fewer accidents. And for us, because there was a concern of putting an elderly individual into a facility where the propensity of catching COVID was actually quite high, there was a natural reluctance to get people to put their loved ones in a facility. So you saw a decrease in claims in that regard. On top of home care claims, people didn't necessarily want some individual who was not a family member coming in and providing home care, because again, the potential exposure. So we saw a decrease in claims across the board, no doubt about that. But at the same time, we saw individuals who were hoping to seek, shall we say, some sort of innovative view of the policies when it came time to asking for certain things. For example, one of the things that you may find in a long-term care policy is what's called an alternative plan of care, or what's referred to as an APOC. And what that is an individual can seek some alternative plan of care. That means that they can get treatment at a different type of facility that would otherwise be covered, or get some other type of treatment that would otherwise be covered, depending on whether or not the doctor has prescribed it, depending on whether we agree, and whether or not it's economically feasible or the most cost-effective method of doing that. And, as with any insurance policies, these APOC plans are very specific in terms of when they're allowed. And more often than not, an individual has to already be on claim before we can allow them to have an alternative plan of care. But some individuals think that they can start with that out the gate. Case in point, somebody who has only a nursing home policy only, but they want to have somebody come into their house because they don't want to take their loved one to a facility, they would ask to have something considered under the APOC. But the policy written as it is requires the individual to at least be on claim. That means to be in a nursing facility and getting covered care before we could even consider an alternative plan. So those are the types of things that have come about, as a result of COVID.
And you and I had talked about this early on, or when you and I spoke a little bit a while ago, but I mean, your company's in California and you're physically located in Colorado. And I think when you first came on, you had, an agreement that I think I might misstate this, but I think you were in California for a chunk of time, and then spending like your long weekends in Colorado, and then COVID hit, and now suddenly then you were just in Colorado all the time.
Yes, when I first accepted the job, there was concerns because I was in fact living here in Colorado, and I accepted the job under the expectation that my family would in fact move out to California. But what happened was I was commuting back and forth. My daughter started school here. It became a bit much to consider my wife and daughter, who had just moved from Pittsburgh to Colorado, to move back to California. And to be candid with you, the problems that we left in California with regards to the the quality of life issues, they were still there. Nothing had changed. As a matter of fact, they had gotten worse. But I had decided no, I was going to stay because I really enjoyed the job. I really enjoyed the challenge, and so I became a commuter, between LA and Denver, hopping on a plane like every other weekend and doing that. And that was frankly the gig that I did. And, whatever you want to call it, because I had nothing to do with COVID, but the fact that everything, everyone was quarantined and had to essentially stay at home, that just obviously worked out for me. And I want to be careful how I say that, because I wouldn't want to think that I took some sort of horrible advantage of something that has really impacted people. But that's what happened because everyone was now working remotely. I was compelled to work remotely, and I've been here ever since for a year now.
Well, I mean, I will say, I think, and I've talked about this a lot with people that, COVID has, it's been, crappy, but I think it has opened up people's eyes that the traditional, you have to be in the office with FaceTime 5 days a week model is people are walking away from and realizing you don't really need that all the time. That's not to say that having FaceTime and being in the office and being collaborative with your colleagues isn't important, but the requirement to have it, I think, is kind of becoming less and less important.
Well, I wonder about that because, as you and I had discussed before, one of the concerns that I have as a claims director who wants to ensure not only that production remains, but that the quality of our individuals, that people remain positive, and that people are encouraged about their work. There's obviously camaraderie that forms when people are in an office. There's being able to engage in light banter with one another and just sort of keep each other informed in the very communal environment of an office. But now that we are, now relegated to our homes as a result of what has happened, my concern is that we're losing our communication skills in that regard. The nonverbal cues that we get to. I just found in my own experience that walking around a claims floor and seeing names and seeing how individuals decorate their cubicle, you associate certain nonverbal indicators with the person. And if you don't see that all the time, you frankly forget their names. You kind of forget who you're talking to, especially when you're only talking on the phone all the time. You forget, did I tell so-and-so this? I don't remember, because I was on the phone with somebody. Being in a room physically and talking with individuals and sharing that experience, I think that does tend to inhibit our communication style, but I think it forces us to be more communicative in other ways, perhaps being more of a good listener, in case in point, as we are here listening to one another. So certainly a variety of changes.
I'm hopeful that it makes people more careful in how they communicate with email, because before, email was sort of, while it was still a staple, it was less central to communications. You could just stick your head out of your office or over your cube and say, hey, what do you think about this, or why'd you do that, or something like this. And emails have historically been somewhat informal and at times can be terse. I'm hopeful that because it is central to how we deal with one another now, that maybe you give it a second read before you hit send.
Agreed. Agreed. Knowing what
I'm guilty
saying.
of some of that myself, so I've been trying to improve on that.
Well, remember,
there's no tone.
Yeah, the E in email means eternal, so it'll always be around. So you want to be cautious about what you put in print.
So as for like your own department, and since now everyone's remote, are you doing anything different or in addition to what you normally do to make sure your department has that camaraderie, that you still feel like part of a team, even though everyone is in their separate spaces, and you're in Colorado?
Sure. Well, yeah, one thing that we do is we have weekly meetings. I make it a point to speak to the supervisors that I manage every other day, if not every day. And we have regularly scheduled meetings. team meetings, Zoom meetings, that sort of thing. So staying in contact with one another and recognizing that, we can call one another if we have anything that needs to be dealt with. And of course, part of the process, at least for the purposes of our claims and moving claims along, we have regular meetings where we talk about specific claims. And so there's always a gathering of some sort on a weekly basis. But even in addition to that, I recognize that my very position as a claims director, that I like to think it means something if I reach out to an adjuster just to ask how they are doing, because I'm genuinely interested, especially when I know individuals are having challenges. As we talk about COVID, one thing that comes to my mind is the realization that, there are three things that have come about as a result of this. Not only that it affected everyone worldwide. This was not just a regional situation that people had to accommodate, but everyone you spoke to, and I spoke to a number of individuals across the country, it affected everyone without a doubt. It was going to change not only how we were going to operate our businesses, but how we were going to, deal with people. The second thing is that obviously a company is going to have to learn how to handle this new reality. And thirdly, the people that work for us, particularly our adjusters, they have lives, they have families, they have children, they have now spouses who are now home working. They have to deal with their own lives as it affects this whole thing. So there are three levels that I think I had to be cognizant of to recognize that, and to the extent of try to encourage individuals, again, having weekly check-ins just to see how people are doing, because I know we have some single moms, we have some elderly individuals, we have some people that, from a variety of different backgrounds, and it's certainly not my place to get in their personal lives, but I recognize that they have challenges, and I want to be sympathetic towards that. Being a little bit more, shall we say, relaxed when it comes to work hours, allowing a little bit more freedom when they have to be off the clock for a certain time to tend to their child's online work or whatever the case may be. So that's what I've done. I've tried to be more proactive about being more understanding about individual circumstances.
I see that. I'm from my personal experiences, I feel a great amount of, I guess, just fatigue at the end of the day, because the day is just, it's so much longer now because there's so much else going on that I have to deal with that I didn't have to deal with before. I mean, before COVID, I still worked from home 4 days a week, but I didn't have my kids here and I didn't have them on their school. So I didn't have to run up and down the stairs, 7 times a day to deal with whatever they're doing. And then your day just gets stretched out so much longer than it did when I traditionally would work from home. And I got so much done. I was so productive. Now it's like these little broken pieces that you kind of have to push together. And by, the end of the day, I don't even know what happened. I'm exhausted.
True. Well, when I was in Los Angeles, I was staying with my family because my family was still out there, my sister and my mom and so forth. It took me 2 hours to commute into LA. And now I'm, using that 2 hours to actually work. My commute now is 3 minutes, for the bedroom to the office. So it certainly is loud, but you're right that it does expand your day, because whereas you may spend time either, kibitzing at the water cooler or driving, you're now working and getting it done. So yeah, that certainly has changed. More time being spent in front of the computer.
Yes, I know. I find myself sometimes being I just cut it off, because sometimes I'm like, wow, I got pulled in this direction, and they're not directions like, oh, I got called to do this on a case. I got pulled in a direction because someone needed help on a test, or they couldn't log into some class. So you get diverted for a little bit and then you have to get back into it. And then I find that I still have to shut it down, because I'm we still need to have that chunk of time after work that you give undivided attention to your family. And because you can't always be that, half here, half there. You have to give them some of that.
True.
And so then I think that's where, for at least personally, where a lot of the exhaustion comes in, because you're all day, you're moving around in all these different directions. You're okay, now I need to cut it off so I can actually devote some attention. And now I need to pick up later what I left off. So,
and you have to do that.
For me, it's weird. My wife and I don't have kids, and we've been working from home for years now, and I'm now in my home during daylight hours, which is a strange thing. Before that, I would leave in the dark and come home in the dark. So it's strange to be in the house during a weekday and look outside and it's light out.
And you have such quality time together now.
Yeah.
I tell you one thing that I need to be more cognizant of is the fact that I don't get out as much because, getting in a car, driving to work, sitting in traffic, listening to the radio, it does allow you some time to decompress or kind of prepare yourself for the day. And then you get to the office and do your thing. But sitting in an office at home, sometimes I actually forget to go outside. I could be sitting here and, bright sunny day when I wake up in the morning, and at night it's snowing. And it's like, where did the day go? Because I don't even take the time to do that. And I need to be more aware of that because you can lose days and that's not healthy. Go out and get some sunlight.
Just to close up a little bit here, we've talked a lot about like your whole, trajectory of your career and the
such as it is.
Yeah. But, what else do you do outside of, work and with your family? What is there anything that any hobbies or passions that you have that you do on the side?
I'm a musician.
Really?
I've been a musician. Yes.
Love it.
I was a musician. In fact, when I first started playing, I started in at 10 years old playing drums. And that was pretty fun because, it was a little $25 set and I got in my garage and I would put on my headphones and put on my Beatle album and just play with it. But then from there, I actually became formally trained in being a musician. I played in jazz bands, concert bands, and orchestral bands and so forth. And that was sort of the thing that I enjoyed doing. Then I learned to play guitar. So being a musician has always been something I've always enjoyed. It's always been a release. When I was in college, didn't play so much. And then, of course, I tell you what, music has such a connection to me. I think it does to everybody. A friend of mine says, when you're in a good mood, you listen to the melody. When you're in a bad mood, you listen to the words. And I think that's true because one of my favorites is Steely Dan. I enjoy their music. And when I was in Pittsburgh, I didn't want to listen to them because I didn't want to hear the good music when I was in such a sour mood. But now things are looking better that I've reinvested in the drum set. And so that's what I do. I got a little music room. I play music. I write songs just for my own enjoyment. But that's really something I enjoy doing. That's my release, having a drum set and being able to get to playing. And the fun thing about it is much like I did when I was 10 and getting a record and putting it on, I can now digitize and pull up my favorite mix of songs on YouTube and play along with it, just like I used to. So it's something I think that Carl Jung talked about, that circumambulation. You find your youth as you get older. So
I love it. Is the room in that your music room, is it soundproof or does everyone in your house get to appreciate your music when you play?
You know what? Because we're in Colorado, we have a finished basement. And so It's actually cinder blocks. It's like a bunker. And, since it's been so long since I played drums, I come to find that they actually have, quiet drum heads. They're these mesh heads that have, they're very fine holes that they reduce the sound by 80%. And they have cymbals like that as well. So I could make all kinds of noise and it just sounds like you have the stereo on loud. So I was thrilled to death to be able to actually play, not so much at top volume, but being able to really play, like I would play without necessarily bothering the neighbors or bothering my wife or daughter. So, we all have an arrangement. They understand music is important.
That's awesome. I love it.
Oh, yes. I wish I played more though. I wish because of COVID, there are not opportunities to play in clubs and things like that. And I will say this again, referring back to Pittsburgh, my time out there, one thing my wife and I did do because I couldn't find a job because she sings and I play guitar. We played. We actually got a gig to play, ironically, at a senior center. And we played for, about 6 weeks, $125 a week, plus free drinks. And it was nice. It was a fun thing to do. In Gibsonia, Pennsylvania.
All the Ensure you can drink. That's free.
Yes.
I think you need to clarify what kind of drink was free. Is it apple juice?
Well, soft drinks of sort. No, actually, this place was a beautiful resort. It was a senior like a townhome, but it was like a big community. They had a lunchroom that really looked like a cafeteria, like a restaurant, and they had the small room that on Fridays they would turn into a quote unquote pub where they served beer and wine. And, we were the live entertainment. So we played for an hour and a half and, they seemed to enjoy it and we enjoyed it. But that was one of the little fun things that we got to do. And I'd love to be able to do that again when time allows and when restrictions, don't prohibit it.
I love it. I love that your wife does it as well. I think that's awesome. It's just a neat thing to do together.
Yeah, she's a singer from way back. She started just like I did, when we were teenagers. The love to just perform and do something like that. So yeah, I'm happy about that.
Now, is your daughter musically inclined as well? Is she going to be in your
Yes,
band?
yes, she doesn't like my, well, she's exposed to my music, I think out of necessity because I'm always playing it. But yeah, she took guitar, and she's become very interested in playing the guitar. And frankly, I have learned from her because I've never actually taken a formal guitar class. I just taught myself. I picked up a guitar, grabbed a chord book, and it really just frankly came to me quite naturally, which I'm pleased about. For her, she actually took a class in school, and I was listening to her, and she showed me things, and that was impressive to me. That my daughter was learning something. It's like, hey, I could learn from you. And so yeah, she is musically inclined. She loves music and she likes playing, but she won't play for us. We ask her to play and she's like, no, she shuns that idea. In fact, just about a week ago, I bought her a banjo because she wanted the banjo. And it's like, great. If you want to play musical instruments, I'm happy to support that.
Oh, I love it.
One of our paralegals is a musician, and he's gonna yell at me if I don't ask you what kind of guitar you play, because I think he has quite a collection.
He and I would be in good company because I have quite a collection. My first guitar was this little $10 knockoff guitar that I bought at a swap meet in Los Angeles. But since that time, I've acquired at least, and I don't mean to sound boastful, but like 11 guitars. I have, one of my favorites is a Gibson SG. He'll know what that is if you ask him, but a Gibson SG. I also have which I recently just acquired, a Washburn 12-string guitar. It's beautiful. I can play my Gordon Lightfoot songs on it, because that's what I used to play when I used to play in clubs years and years and years ago. It was just me and my voice, my guitar and my voice. So I had to pick songs that were just basically guitar and voice, whether it be Jim Croce, Simon & Garfunkel, James Taylor, some Beatles, that type of thing. But the guitars I have are, I've got quite a few. I've got a Rickenbacker 12-string, which I never use, but I can't get rid of it because it's such a find. And I actually enjoyed finding old guitars and fixing them up. To me, there's something about the patina on a used guitar. I'd much rather have a used guitar than a new guitar, because a used guitar that's well worn is an indication that it's a good guitar, because
you might like the one that I've got. I don't play. It was my grandfather's, but it's a 1932 Gibson LG1.
You need to hold on to that and put it in the glass case, with a humidifier. That sounds like an exceptional guitar. I'd encourage you to get that worked out and never sell it, even if you don't play it. Don't
No,
sell it.
he bought it used actually in 1944, I believe. And he
Amazing.
paid $450 for it in 1944, which he said was more than 2 years' salary for him.
Oh yeah, that's a lot of money back then, no doubt about it. So that's cool. That's cool. I'm very happy to hear.
I don't play, but
other musicians out there. Well, keep it. So when people come over who do play, they will marvel at it. So I encourage you to keep it. Just make sure it keeps tuned. Yeah, and in a case.
Here you go, Oliver. There's your advice for today.
That's a nickel's worth of free advice.
Well, Daryl, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed talking to you. I can't even speak. Talking to you tonight. And I thanks so much for coming on and sharing your experiences and your journey, and really talking about your albeit negative experience with identity theft. But I mean, I really enjoyed listening to the story. It's just, I don't know. It's interesting.
I appreciate the opportunity to tell it. I was kind of reserved about whether or not how much I wanted to share, but frankly, it's a story. It's a story that I think people are intrigued by. And just, I will say as a final note that, you ever going to ask me like how I got into claims. I actually started in claims at 18 years old as an ambulance driver. And perhaps that's a story for another time. But that was my first job out of high school, being a medical technician. And that launched me into my illustrious career of claims handling. But I appreciate this time. So thank you so much. Again, I appreciate you, talking to you both.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely.